Hey, what's up YouTube? Today we are going to start a 4-part video series, and this is video 1 of 4, and we are going to create a full authentication system using Auth.js version 5, formerly known as next-auth. So like I said, this is part 1 of 4, but in this 4-part series, we are going to learn the full authentication system when it comes to using the credentials provider, the Google provider, how to initialize your Auth.js inside of your Next.js application, how to set up the database, the ORM, which we're going to use Prisma. We are going to use the asynchronous callbacks that Auth.js provides us as well, so we could do powerful function calling when a certain event takes place. We are also going to set up how to send verification emails and how to verify them, as well as the reset passwords, just in case a user needs to reset their password. So if this sounds very interesting to you and you want to use Auth.js version 5 with Next.js, hit that like button and then also subscribe for more content. And what I'm going to do is, if you guys are watching the videos as I release them, I'm going to release one video a day. So if this video comes out, say on Sunday or Monday, which those are my days I'm planning for, I'm going to release a video day after until we finish the series off with 4 complete videos. So this is going to be video 1 of 4, and in this video we are going to show you how to set up a database, how to connect Prisma ORM to your database and your application, and we're also going to make sure we initialize and configure Auth.js into your application so we can set up the credentials provider and the Google provider in part 2 of this series. So stick around and let's get going to code. But before we do that, I'm going to show you a demo of how the application is going to be when we complete it. This is a demo of what we're going to build within this 4-part video series. So as you can see, we have a custom built UI register page. And what this is going to do, it's going to register the user in the authentication system and register an user within your database. Let's provide the email, the name, and the password. And it's also going to make us confirm the password as well. We're going to click register, and this is going to send an email verification to the email we provided. So we could go to Gmail, and as you can see, we do have a please verify your email address just received to me. But before we actually verify the email, I want to go to the login page, and I'm going to try to log in now. And we are going to use the correct password and email. We're going to click login, and it's going to tell you to please confirm your email address. So now let's confirm the email address. We're going to click here to confirm. So as you can see, it's just a simple email template made with React Email. We're going to click to confirm, and our email was verified successfully. So now let's try to log in. Okay, so now we are on the dashboard. After a successful login, we are redirected to the dashboard, and that was using the credentials provider. So now that we're on the dashboard, we are on a page that is considered protected. So the dashboard page is a protected page that only verified users who are registered can actually access. So we are going to use middleware to protect this page with Auth.js. Another thing is, I want to log out now, so there is a log out functionality. So now we're logged out, and I am going to delete that user because I want to show you guys that same email, but signing up with the Google provider now as well. Okay, so I quickly deleted that user from the MongoDB database. Now I am going to sign in with Google, right? And what I could do is I could sign in with that same email since it's deleted. And this is the Google provider working, and it redirects us on a successful login to the dashboard. And the Google provider is cool because we don't have to verify the email because Google did all the hard work and made sure it was an actual verified email already. So now that we're on the dashboard page, everything is good and we are logged in. We're also going to click the log out. And another thing I do want to show you is if we go to the settings, you can see we're displaying the name and the email, and if they're on a plan or not. This is specific to this project, but this is just showcasing you that you could get the user session, and then you could get the data from the session and display it to the user, making a settings page, a custom dashboard page, depending on the user's data. Now I want to show you how the middleware works. So we're on the dashboard, correct? Now if we log out, and say we start with the register page, and say if we manually try to type in dashboard, so we manually want to go to the dashboard page, it's going to redirect us right to the login page. And the reason why is because the middleware is protecting those protected pages. And that is all done through Auth.js, and that is your full authentication system in a nutshell. So this is exactly what we're going to create in a 4-part series. And let's get to part 1, where we're going to configure everything and set up everything so we could have a successful system. The first thing we want to do is we want to initialize a new Next.js application, which in our case, it's going to be version 15. So to do that, I'm going to open up my terminal, and I am going to change directories into where I save all of my projects on my local computer. Next, we are going to run the command npx create -next-app at latest. So no matter when you're watching this video, it's always going to create the latest version of the Next.js that is in the stable version. So we're going to click enter. And next, it's going to prompt us with a few questions like, what is your project named? What we can do is we could just type in whatever you want. I'm going to type in auth version 5 tutorial. Then would you like to use TypeScript? Yes. ESLint, we're going to say yes. Tailwind CSS, yes. Would you like to your code inside a source directory? No. The app router, yes. Turbo pack for Next.dev, yes. The import alias is going to be the default, so we're going to say no. And now it's going to initialize the project. It's going to install the dependencies and the dev dependencies dependent on what we answered and what is required for a Next.js application. This should probably take about 15 seconds. And now we could change directories into that project's name. So we could just do cd auth -version 5 -tutorial. And then we could do code space dot. And what this is going to do, it is going to open up VS Code with the project we just created. So right now we have a boilerplate of a Next.js 15 application. And I do want to show you the version that I'm working with. And that is going to be version 15.0.4. Before actually setting up the authentication with Auth.js, we do need to create a database, and we need to set up Prisma, which is the ORM to connect our database to our application. This is very important because if you don't do this, this whole authentication system isn't going to work. You do need a database, and you do need to interact with the database when it comes to authentication. So let's first set up a MongoDB database. To do that, let's go to our Google Chrome. And what we can do is we can start from the beginning. We're going to go to google.com and we're going to search MongoDB. If you've never used it before, it is a database, and we could sign in, and you could either sign in with your Google provider, GitHub, or you could create an account with the email and password. After you sign in, you should be on a page that looks very similar to this. This is your dashboard, and at the top left, you're going to see your different projects that you have created, or you're just going to see a new project button if you don't have any projects created. So what we're going to do is we're going to click new project, and we are going to have to give our project a name. So for us, we're just going to do auth-version 5 tutorial. And then add tags is optional, so we're just going to skip that and click next. And then we're not going to add any members. It's just going to be us. So we're going to click create project. So this is going to create our project. And next, what we could do is we could create a cluster. So this is going to be able to choose your cloud provider, the region, and the specs as well. So we are going to use the free tier. So this is for learning and exploring MongoDB in a cloud environment. This should be plenty of storage for us, and we don't need much more than that. We're going to create the cluster name. So you cannot change the name once the cluster is created. So I'm just going to leave it as cluster 0. It's not a big deal. This is only going to be shown on your side in the database. Next is we have the provider to choose from. We're going to choose AWS. Next is going to be the region. The region is going to be based on where you live. So I'm on the East Coast of the United States. So I'm going to choose the North Virginia, which is on US East. And the tags are optional, so we're just going to skip that as well for now. So we're going to create the deployment. And now it's going to tell you to create a database user. So you're going to need the database user's credentials to actually complete the connection string, which allows us to connect to MongoDB. So for the username, you could do whatever you want. I'm going to do bwestwood11, which is the usual username I do for databases. And then the password, they give you one, which is a hard to guess one. So I just like using this, or you can create your own. But for now, I'm just going to copy theirs that they created, the password. I'm going to open up my notepad on my computer, and I'm just going to save it here because we are going to need this password for later for the connection string. Then we are going to click create database user. And now we are going to choose a connection method. So before we choose the connection method, I do want to close this, and we're not going to be able to connect until the cluster is created. This takes anywhere from like a few minutes to maybe even 5 minutes, depending on your internet connection. So I'm going to come back when this is done creating. So this took about 3 to 4 minutes for it to actually create the cluster. Now we can try to connect it to our actual application code, which is in VS Code. So we're going to click connect right here. And we are going to choose our connection method, and we're just going to click connect application with via drivers. So to do this, we can skip steps 1 and 2. What we need is step 3 is to add your connection string into your application code. So we're going to press copy here, and I'm going to copy this in our notepad. So I have my notepad here, and I have this connection string copied as well. So it says you have to replace the DB password with the password for bwestwood11, which is the database user, which is that password right here that we saved in our notepad just a minute ago. So we are going to do that when we actually store it inside of our env file, but for now it's going to be inside of our notepad. Other than that, we can click done. And then we can minimize this MongoDB page because we do have to come back to it later when we are testing out our users when they're getting authenticated into the database. But for now, MongoDB, the setup is complete and ready to go. And next, let's set up the ORM, which is Prisma. We are now back in VS Code. And the first thing we need to do is we need to install the Prisma CLI locally as a development dependency. The Prisma CLI is the primary way which we're going to interact with our Prisma project from the command line. So to do that, we are going to open up our terminal within VS Code so you guys could see it better. And we are going to type npm install prisma --save -dev. And what this is going to do, it's going to install Prisma as a dev dependency, but for some reason I must have typed in something wrong. Let's try this again. It's going to be npm install. Oh, I spelled Prisma wrong. It's going to be --save -dev. So as you can see in the dev dependencies, this is going to pop up, and I'm using version 6.0.1. So now the next thing we have to run on the terminal is we have to initialize Prism. So to do that, we can run the command npx prisma init, just like that. What this is going to do, it is going to create a folder, a Prisma folder with a bare bones schema.prism file, and it's also going to create a .env file in the root of our project. So as you can see, we have our .env file, and we have the Prisma folder with a schema.prism file. First, let's go in the .env file, and let's add our connection string. So this is the database underscore URL. This variable, we will keep it as is, and we are going to remove the default, which is a Postgres connection string, and we are going to go to our notepad. Right, we are going to copy the connection string. We're going to paste it here, and then what we have to do is we have to replace this db underscore password with the less than and greater than sign with the password that we saved when creating the database user. So let's just paste that in here and replace that. And another thing we have to do is after you see mongodb.net /, we have to create a collection here, and we can name this wherever we want. We are going to name this users because this is an authentication system that's going to have users. If you do leave it blank like this, the collection name is just going to be test. But for us, we could just put users here for like that. And then this is just a question mark. And then these are queries saying the retry rights equals true. And majority and app name equals cluster 0, which is the cluster that we created because we left it by default. So this is our connection string that Prisma ORM is going to read inside of the schema.prisma file. So if we go over to the schema.prisma file, this file is going to be where you're going to be able to define your data source, which would be MongoDB in our case. So our data source right now is defined as Postgres. What we need to do is we need to define this as a MongoDB or whatever database you're using. You're going to type here. And you can see the options on the Prisma docs. But for us, just do MongoDB. Hopefully you're following along with the tutorial. And then it will also define the generator. And the generator, there's only one generator when it comes to generating Prisma on the client, which is our code. And that is going to be the Prisma client. So the provider is going to equal prisma-client.js. And then we have the URL, which is going to point to the connection string, which we just changed in the env file. So the env file and the connection string variable is going to be database _ URL. So all of this is set up correctly now to actually point to our database. Now the next thing you do in your schema.prisma file is you are going to define your models. So defining your models is pretty much just going to specify the structure of your database and the collections if you're using MongoDB, or the relations if you're using something like Postgres. And another thing I do want to point out is if your code doesn't look like this, where it has this color coded like blue and green and everything looks really nice, there's two things you have to do. One, you have to go to the extensions tab in VS Code and search for Prisma. And you're going to find an extension that adds syntax highlighting, formatting, auto-completion, jump to definition, and lidding for all Prisma files. So you're going to install this and make sure it's enabled. And you might have to restart your VS Code, but it should look something like this. And the other thing is too, if you press Control S, it is going to auto format everything. And to make sure your Control S is working if you're on Windows, or Command S if you're on Mac, what you can do is you can press Control Shift P. And inside of this, you are going to type in user settings, which I have recently used. And inside of the user settings, you are going to see something called editor.format on save. And just make sure this is true. And if you don't have this, you can add this line here. And this is just going to be able to autosave when you press Control S. And if it's not working there, what you can do is you can copy this and then look for Prisma in here, which is right here. And then make sure you paste it in the object here with a comma after this if it's not working correctly. And then you're probably going to reset your VS Code server and then just close out of all of VS Code and then reopen it. So that is going to help you create your schema.prisma file a lot better and organized when developing. Okay, so when creating the model, there is an example of how to create the models when it comes to Auth.js. And the first model we are going to create is called the user model. And these models can have any names that you want it to have. So obviously, like I said, authentication system, we have a bunch of users. So the first thing the user needs is an ID, which is a unique identifier. And what this is going to have, it's going to have a specific decorator at the end. And this decorator is going to be based on the database we have. So for ours, we are going to have @ID, @default auto. We're going to have @map, and it's going to look for every field that has a _ID. And where it's getting this _ID field from is anytime it creates a new entry into our database, that entry is going to have a specific ID, and MongoDB has that field name as _ID. So that is why every ID is going to be unique, and it is going to equal the _ID inside of our user. Next, what we want to have is we want to have a name, which is going to be a string. It's going to be required, so we're going to keep it as is. We're going to have an email, which is going to be string, and it's going to be unique. And the reason why it's unique is because there's only going to be one email per account, and we're not going to have people having duplicate emails, because this is going to cause problems later on in your authentication system. Next thing we want to do is we want to make sure the email is verified. So we're going to have a field called email verified, and instead of a Boolean, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a date time field, and it's going to be optional. So right now, initially, it's going to start off as null. And then when they verify the email, we can update it with a specific time and date. And then this field will populate with that specific time and date, knowing that they verified their email address. Next thing we want is we want the password, which is going to be a string. And after that, what we want is we also want to have a created at, which is always a good field to have. And this is going to be a date time, and it's going to default to now. So that is, it's just going to take the time that this user was created and store that in the created at field. And we can also have a updated at field, which is date and time. And they have a decorator called updated at. So anytime this model gets updated, this time is going to change based on that updated time. Okay, so next, we're going to add one more thing here, but it won't make sense until we create this other model. So the next model is going to be account. So for our application, you can log in either with the credentials provider or a Google provider. And the Google provider has a certain data structure that we don't know because we're not going to be able to guess it. So Auth.js actually provides documentation of how that should look. So we're going to go over to Google, and you could go over to this specific URL. And this is the documentation in Auth.js for the Prisma and the Prism adapter. So if we scroll down, what we can do is we can look at the schema file that they have. So as you can see, they have account, session, user, verification token. All we need to do is use the account for now and the user. We're going to create models later on in the video, but for now, these are the only two we need. And there is a few things that I am going to change inside of this specific model. For example, this decorator at the end is actually not specific to MongoDB. It's specific to Postgres, so it's going to throw us an error. So I'm going to copy and paste the model I have in my code that I use for my actual production-ready projects, and we are going to use that model, and it's pretty much similar to this, but just specified for MongoDB. So what we're going to do is we're going to copy and paste that. And what you see here is we have a model named account with an ID, user ID, type, provider, and all the good stuff that tells us to have. And then the most important thing is we want to connect the account to the user. So not everybody can have an account, okay? So if you log in with the Google provider, you're going to have an account. But if you don't, all you're going to have is a user. However, everybody's going to have a user because the account is going to connect to a user. And if the account can't connect to a specific user, it's going to create the user and update the fields as well. So what we could do here is inside of the model user, what we're going to have is we're going to have something called accounts. And then we're just going to have like this an array of the model account with a capital A. So it's going to look something like that. And then we could press Control S to make sure everything's formatted nice. And then as you can see here, it has a user field, and it's looking at the user model, and it's trying to build a relation between this model, the account model, and the user model. And what it's doing is it's taking the user ID field from the the account, and is matching it and referencing it to the ID of the model user right here. So that is going to be the same. So these two values, the user ID and the ID, are going to be exactly the same. So that is going to how they're going to connect to each other. And like I explained, every user is going to have a user model, but not every user is going to have an account model, because those people are going to be the only people that have actually logged in with a Google account. So after we have created our schema file and updated it, a thing you must run a command is npx prisma db push. And what this is going to do, it's going to, let me make sure I spelled it right. Of course I didn't spell it right. So just make sure you're spelling all the commands right. So what this is going to do, it's going to push this local schema file into your database. So these fields, it's going to push these fields into the database. And if you want to make sure it did it successfully, you can run the command npx prisma studio. And this is going to open up like your database, but at localhost 555. And what we can do is we can look at the models we created, which is an account and user, which we have 0 in there. So we have no users and no accounts. We can look at like the user model, and we can see all the fields we created here as columns. So there's no rows in the table because there is obviously no users. And then we can look at the account, and you can see that the database has updated with the specific fields that we created inside of the models inside of the schema.prisma file. So everything looks to be working fine, right? So next thing we need to do is we need to install the Prisma client. This is going to allow us to query into our database within our code. So to do this, what we can do is we can go over to our VS Code. We could stop the studio from running, right? And we are going to run the command npm install app prisma /client. So anytime you do make a change inside of your schema.prisma file, there is 2 commands you should run. You should run the npx prisma db push to push it to your database. And then you also need to run npx prisma generate. And this is to update the generated Prisma client code in the node _ modules /.prisma /client directory. So this is going to allow us to actually query, read, and write data into our database and make sure that it's actually updated with our schema.prisma file. So now we must initiate Prisma client. And when most people initiate Prisma client, they're going to do it like this. So I'm going to show you, for example. So they're just going to import Prisma client. And it's going to be from @Prisma client. And then what they're going to do here is they're going to say const Prisma equals new Prisma client. So this is not the correct way to do it. It's going to work, but it's going to create too many connection pools. And what this does is each time an instance of the Prisma client is called, it is going to create a new connection pool, and you're going to have a bunch of different connections open, pretty much open and active, that are connecting from your code to your database. And what you want is you only want to have one connection pool open at all times, because when you have too many, it is going to severely affect your code, and eventually you're going to run into an error, and it's just going to make your code slow and just your development process slow as well. It's going to almost seem like it's lagging. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to initiate Prisma client in a global state. So to do that, you can look at the Prisma documentation, and they do give you a file on how you should do it, but I'm just going to copy and paste it from my project, and I got this code exactly from the Prisma docs. All you have to look up is how to initiate Prisma client the correct way, and it'll show you the code for that. So for this, what we're going to do is inside the Prisma folder, let's create a new file called prisma.ts. And inside of there, I am just going to copy this code. And what this code is doing, like I said, it's just initiating the Prisma client. So now it's going to allow us to use this Prisma variable throughout our whole application with one connection pool, no matter how many times we are going to use it. And it is storing it in the global for Prisma state right here. So now, like I said, we could use this instead. So to do that, instead of using this Prisma client, we're going to import Prisma from the @prisma/Prisma. And then we could do different queries like Prisma.user.findMany, and then call something like that. And then we could just run a bunch of different methods and functions to query our database in the best practice way now. Now we have the ORM and our database set up successfully. Now let's actually get into Auth.js. But before we forget anything, the last package I do want to install is from Auth.js, and it is the Prisma adapter. And we are going to need this because we're going to have to connect the ORM to our Auth.js package. So let's just install this package. We are going to need this later, but I just want to do it now so I don't forget and you don't forget either. So we're just going to do an npmi. We copied it. It's going to be @auth/prism/adapter. And then what we could do now is we can go to the documentation, which is the getting started, migrating to version 5. So the very first thing is, to get started, we need to install the latest version of next-auth with the beta tag. So let's just copy this command, go into our code, and let's install next-auth and then @beta. So after we have this installed, we could look at our package.json, and I can show you the versions we're using. We're using 5.0.0-beta.25. There's our adapter versions. Here's our Prisma versions, our Prisma client versions, all that good stuff. So if you need to pause the video, pause it so you can make sure, if you want, you could keep the same versions as I am within this specific tutorial. Okay, so now it just goes over a few new features, which are the main changes. It's app router first, and it still supports the pages, but Next.js has moved over to the app router. They also have more support for the OAuth on preview deployments. They have a simplified setup now, which is sharing configs, inferred env variables, and such for things like that. They have a new account callback on providers, and they have edge compatibility. And then one of the very cool things is the universal auth. So they're going to have a single method for allowing us to authenticate anywhere. So we're going to use auth instead of get the server session, get session, with auth, get token, use session. So these were all hooks or functions that we called to get the user in the past to get the session. Now we're just going to use one single method to authenticate anywhere, which is auth like this. Okay, so let's configure Auth.js. So this is pretty much where it starts when it comes to Auth.js version 5. And the first thing we want to do is we want to create a auth.ts file. So that is going to be the very first file we're creating, and that is going to be on the root layer of your application. So let's just close all these files and let's create a new file called auth.ts. And inside auth.ts, what we're going to do is we're going to import next-auth, and this is coming from next-auth like that. Then we are also going to import the Prisma adapter. So that was just the package we installed. So Prisma adapter from auth/prism-adapter. And another thing is now we can actually create the function, but let's also import Prisma as well. So the Prisma client. So this is going to be Prisma in an object, and this is coming from /Prisma folder, and then /Prisma as well, like that. Okay, perfect. So now we're going to create a function. So we're going to say export const, and then we are going to export all of these specific variables or functions, right, that we could use throughout our application. So we're going to export auth. We're going to export our handlers, And these handlers are going to be a get and post request that we're going to be doing. So after that, we are going to have a sign in function, a sign out function, and that's all we're going to have for now. And this is going to equal next-auth like this. It's going to be an object, and in this object, we could pass a bunch of different options. So the first one is we're going to have the adapter, right? And the adapter is going to be the Prisma adapter. And what we're passing in here is we have to pass in the Prisma client. So that's why I imported Prisma from here. And what we can do here is we could press enter, and you could press control and space like this, and it's going to give you the different options that we could pass in here. Okay. So the next one I do want to pass in is the session. So we have to define the session. So there's two different types of sessions when it comes to Auth.js, and that is database or JWT. And what we are going to use is we're going to use JWT because we are not technically compatible with the edge. And the reason why is because Prisma doesn't allow you to run queries and stuff on the edge. So we do have to separate our configuration file of Auth.js into 3 separate files, and we have to use JWT, so JSON Web Tokens, as the strategy for tracking the session. So the session is going to be the user and the user information when they're actually logged in. So the strategy is going to be that. And then we are going to have one more here, but for now we are just going to keep this how it is. And next, what we can do is we are going to create an auth.config.ts file. So auth.config.ts file. And I want to show you where I'm getting all this information from. So if you go to the documentation, it's going to tell you could create files like this. But if you scroll down a little bit more, it's going to talk about the edge compatibility. And you're going to have to check to see if your ORM is edge compatible or not, which, like I said, Prisma right now at the moment is not. So if it isn't, then you're going to have to start with something like this. You're going to create an auth.config.ts file. You're going to create your auth.ts file. And as you can see, we created the auth.ts file. And this is how I am writing the code. And it's very similar to what we just created inside our actual application. So next, we're going to create this auth.config.ts file. And what we are going to do is they're using the GitHub provider. We're obviously going to be using the Google and the credentials provider. So to do this, what we can do is we can go back to our code. And inside the auth config file, we're going to import Google. And this is going to come from next-auth providers-Google. And then we're also going to import credentials, and this is coming from next-auth /providers/credentials. We are also going to import type, and this is going to be type of next-auth config like this, and this is coming from next-auth. Now let's create our function. We're going to export the function as a default function, and in this function we are going to have providers, right? So we're going to have providers like this, and in this providers is going to be an array because you can have multiple providers, so that's why it's going to be an array. And let's at the end, let's just define the type, so it's going to satisfy as the next-auth config like this. So we're going to have the Google provider, so we're going to type in Google. And for now, hopefully it just allows us to have an empty object, which it does. And then we're also going to have the credentials, which is going to be an empty object as well for now. So this is where we're going to be able to make sure we connect our Google and credentials and define how we should within our auth.config.ts file. And then what we can do inside of our auth.ts file now is we can come back to this, and then we can spread through the auth config file here. So auth config. And as you can see, we are importing it from the auth config file, which is right here. So now that we have our auth.ts file set up and our auth.config.ts file set up, we are going to create a route. So this is going to be a catch-all route. So let's see if the documentation shows it, because sometimes the Auth.js documentation, which I've heard from a lot of people, is very confusing. So sometimes their documentation isn't even in the correct order of how you should be doing stuff. Like, I don't think the catch-all route is even shown here, which is needed. So I think that's a little weird. But the next thing we do have to do is we do have to create a catch-all route, and you're going to understand why. So inside of our app folder, we're going to have another folder called API. And inside this, we're going to have a folder called auth. And then inside of the auth folder, we're going to have another folder, which is a catch-all route. It's going to be ... next-auth, and then a bracket again. So this is going to catch all of the route of file names within this specific route here. So we're just going to put a new file called route.ts. And inside the route.ts is literally one line of code. And in the previous versions, this is where you actually configured everything. So the auth config, the Auth.js, all of this was combined inside of this catch-all route. So they made it a little easier to track because they did break it up. But we are going to export the get and post. And where we're getting this is coming from that auth file. So what we could do is we could do /auth like this. Okay. So this is going to allow you to do get and post requests based on this specific API endpoint here. So what I could show you is if we could do npm run dev, it might not work right now because we don't have any providers actually set up correctly, like the Google credentials provider. But I'm going to show you exactly where you're going to go to see how you can actually test your providers out correctly without creating any UI or UX with Tailwind. So it's already a pre-built page that is at a specific endpoint that you must hit. So, and this endpoint is going to be something similar to this. So watch. So we're going to go to localhost 3000, and that catch-all endpoint we just created. So we're going to go to /API /auth. And then one of the endpoints that we can do is /sign-in. So there's a problem with the server configuration. Check the server logs for more information. So sometimes you're going to get a lot of errors like this. So you can check the server logs. And we are missing a secret, which that was going to be the next step. But obviously I can't continue without that. So the secret is going to be pretty much a key that is going to allow you to encrypt your JWT, and it's also going to allow us to decode the JWT so we could get the session data. So next-auth is actually doing this all behind the scenes, so we just need to give it a secret so it can actually decrypt the JWT so we could actually authenticate the user and make sure everything's secured. So to do that, we go inside the .env file, right? And what we are going to do inside of here is we are going to have a auth_secret. Oops, auth_secret like this. And this variable has to be named exactly like this. So auth_secret, and this could be any key you want, any value you want. So just random values is preferred because you want to make this as hard as you can for them to guess, because this is going to be the secret that's pretty much allows you to decode and encode the JWT. So what now we have to do is it's telling us we have to reload the env file. So let's just do a Control-C, and let's just do npm run dev again because we didn't make a change in the .env file. And now we have our auth secret. And after we have our auth secret, let's see if we can refresh our page and see if it actually shows us anything. So it does. So now, as you can see, this specific endpoint, localhost 3000 /API /auth /sign-in, gives us a pre-built sign-in page with a sign-in with Google and sign-in with credentials. So the reason why it's giving us that is because those are the two we defined. So for example, if we came back to our auth.config.ts file and we did an import GitHub, and then we added GitHub here, right? We add GitHub here, and then let's refresh our localhost 3000. You're going to see that a GitHub popped up as well. But if you try to click any of them, they're not going to work, right? None of them are going to work. Sign in failed, check the details you provided correct, or sign with GitHub. I mean, none of these are going to work because we haven't actually initialized them and coded them correctly yet. We haven't even started on them yet. So all we have done so far is, let me just remove that GitHub real quick because we're not using it. We have configured Auth.js with version 5 that we migrated to, and we made sure that it is able to work even if your ORM isn't ready to be on the edge, like Prisma. So like I said, check your ORM to make sure if it's edge compatible or not. They might have a list of it being edge compatible or not. You could probably check, or you could check the documentation of the ORM. But for now, if you want, it is a good practice to always look through the documentation. And I do want to show you the one spot which I see right off the bat is the auth_secret environment is the only variable that is really necessary. You do not need to additionally pass this value into your config as the secret configuration option if you've set the environment variable. So that's all you have to do, and it's going to be able to read the secret and know that you have one there. So that's pretty much it when it comes to configuring Auth.js and setting it up correctly with a database and the ORM. So this is going to be it for part 1 of the 4-part series. In part 2, we are going to set up the Google provider and the credentials provider, and we're also going to create the login page and the register page as well, so you can see the custom UI instead of using that pre-built page. And when we set up the Google and the credentials provider, we're also going to have to create a server action to actually register the user to our database, and then use the credentials provider, because the credentials provider is only for logging in a user and authenticating them. So we do have to register a user using a server action that Next.js allows us to use. So hopefully you guys like this video. Like I said, the next video is going to come out tomorrow, and then part 3 will be the next day, and then part 4 will be the following day. So if you can, hit the like button, and then also subscribe for more content so other people just like you who need help when it comes to authenticating in Next.js can get the help that they need. If you guys do have any questions, leave them down in the comment section below. And also you can join my Discord room if you do have any questions that require more effort. But other than that, hope you guys have a great day, and looking forward to see you guys in part 2.